Ever get stuck in one of those thought loops, like your brain's just hit the repeat button on some worry or frustration?
Oh, yeah, totally. Like that inner voice just won't quit.
And it's rarely saying anything helpful, is
Ah,
it? More like a running commentary of all the things that are wrong, all the ways you messed up.
that's exactly the kind of thing we're digging into today. That mental noise, that inner critic going rogue.
It's what Ethan Kross, in his 2021 book, brilliantly calls chatter.
Chatter. The voice in our head, why it matters, and how to harness it.
And what's great about this book is it's not just some self-help fluff. Cross really dives deep into the science of it all.
He's a big name in the field of the conscious mind, and he pulls from all these different areas. Psychology, for sure, but also things like medicine, philosophy, even computer science.
To really understand this inner voice of ours. And it turns out it's way more complex and powerful than we might think.
Right from the start, Cross makes it clear just how fundamental this inner voice is to who we are.
He starts the book with a pretty intense personal story that really sets the scene.
So he had done this neuroscience study looking at physical and emotional pain and how they're connected, and it kind of went viral. And then, out of the blue, he gets this threatening letter.
Whoa!
Talk about a recipe for inner chatter, right? His mind's racing, trying to figure out what to do, how to handle it.
That must have been scary.
It really underscores why it's so important to understand and manage that internal dialogue so it doesn't take over.
For sure. So, what we're aiming to do in this deep dive is pull out the most useful insights from Cross's research.
Exactly. Especially the tools, the evidence-based strategies that you, the listener, can actually use in your own life.
To quiet that inner critic, to stop feeling so overwhelmed by those negative thought spirals.
To gain control of the chatter.
So let's start with the basics. What exactly is this inner voice Cross keeps talking about?
Okay, so the big thing is this inner voice is a uniquely human thing. It's tied to our ability for introspection, to look inwards and examine our own thoughts and feelings.
So like that ability to reflect on ourselves.
And that, according to Cross, has been a huge advantage for us as a species. It's what lets us imagine things, remember the past, solve problems, be creative, innovate, the whole shebang.
So it's not all bad.
Absolutely not. It's crucial to so much of what makes us human. But to give you an idea of just how much mental chatter we're dealing with, Cross drops this mind-blowing stat.
Okay, hit me.
He says we talk to ourselves internally at a rate that's like speaking 4,000 words per minute out loud.
4,000.
Yeah, 4,000.
That's insane.
To put that in perspective, he compares it to a State of the Union address. One of those can be around 6,000 words and take over an hour to deliver.
So our brains are basically churning through almost a whole presidential speech every minute.
Internally, yeah.
Yeah.
Like if you're awake for, say, 16 hours, that's hundreds of those speeches playing in your head.
Wow. We really do chatter a lot, don't we?
We do. But like we said, this inner voice, it's not inherently a bad thing. In fact, it's essential for a lot of our higher level thinking.
But, as Cross points out, it's when it turns into that negative, repetitive chatter that things get messy.
Especially when we're stressed, under pressure, or dealing with tough emotions.
That's when it really takes over.
Right. And it can show up in so many ways. It might be those long, rambling internal monologues or even full-on dialogues where we're playing different parts in our heads.
Oh, I do that all the time.
Or it could be ruminating, just replaying past events over and over. Or worrying about the future, getting stuck in what-ifs.
Or just this jumbled mess of negative feelings bouncing around with no clear direction.
And sometimes it's getting fixated on a single bad thought, like a broken record. Whatever form it takes, this chatter, it can be incredibly disruptive. It doesn't just make us feel bad, it can actually mess with our ability to think clearly, to perform well, even to connect with others.
Yeah, it's like it takes over your whole mental bandwidth.
This is where Cross brings up this really interesting example, the case of Jill Bolt Taylor.
Oh, the neuroanatomist.
Right. So she had a stroke, and one of the things she experienced was a complete loss of her inner voice,
Wow.
which at first she describes as incredibly peaceful, like this huge relief from the constant mental chatter. But then as she recovered, she started to realize something was missing.
What was it?
She felt a loss of identity, a disconnect from her past, from her sense of self.
So it's like this double-edged sword. On one hand, the inner voice can drive us crazy, but on the other hand, it's a big part of who we are.
Exactly. It's complicated.
Okay, so we're starting to get a picture of what this inner voice is and how it can turn into this problematic chatter. But when does it really start to backfire? What kind of negative consequences can this chatter have?
This is where Cross gets into some really concrete examples. He talks about how chatter can derail even the most automatic skills, things we do without thinking.
Like what?
Well, he talks about this baseball pitcher, Rick Ankiel, who suddenly developed what's known as the yips.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of that. Like when an athlete just loses their ability to perform, even though physically they're fine.
Exactly. And in Ankiel's case, it wasn't a physical issue. It was his inner voice betraying him.
Like overthinking.
Yeah, that anxiety, that doubt, all that internal noise just completely messed with his ability to throw a ball, a skill he had mastered for years.
So it's almost like the brain sabotaging itself.
In a way, yeah. And Cross explains this in terms of our executive functions, which he refers to as the CEO of the brain.
Okay, break that down for me.
So these executive functions are responsible for things like attention, reasoning, problem solving, multitasking, self-control, basically all the mental skills that help us manage our thoughts and behaviors effectively. But here's the catch. They have limited capacity,
Meaning.
meaning we can only hold so much information in our working memory at once. There's this concept called the magical number 4, suggesting we can only juggle about 4 items effectively. And when that negative inner voice, the chatter, kicks in, it's like it hogs all those resources, focusing our attention narrowly on the distress.
Leaving less room for everything else.
Exactly. It's like trying to run a bunch of heavy-duty programs on a computer that doesn't have enough RAM. Everything slows down, gets glitchy.
So you can't really focus on solving a problem or making a decision if your mind is just stuck in this loop of negative thoughts.
Right. It's draining. And it's not just our internal world that suffers. This unchecked chatter can spill over into our social lives as well.
In what way?
Well, it's interesting. We often seek out social support when we're struggling, right? Yeah. We turn to friends and family for comfort, to feel better.
Makes sense.
But here's the thing Cross points out. Constantly sharing those negative thoughts, that inner chatter, can actually push people away.
Really?
It's kind of counterintuitive, but think about it. If someone's always dumping their negativity on you, it can get overwhelming. You might start to feel drained or even resentful.
I can see that.
There have been studies on grieving adults, and they found that those who ruminate a lot about their loss actually report more social friction and less support, even though they're often the ones seeking more help.
So it's like a vicious cycle. You need support, but the way you're expressing your need is pushing people away.
Exactly. And it's not just about pushing people away. Cross also talks about a link between rumination and aggression.
Aggression. How so?
When you're constantly dwelling on negative experiences, it keeps those negative emotions simmering. And that can increase the likelihood of acting aggressively, even toward people who had nothing to do with the original situation.
Like taking it out on someone else.
Exactly. Like you have a frustrating encounter with your boss, and you spend the whole commute home replaying it in your head, getting more and more agitated. Then you get home and snap at your partner over something small. It's that kind of displaced aggression that unchecked chatter can fuel.
It's like the negativity has to find an outlet somewhere.
Right. And of course, we can't really talk about inner chatter in this day and age without bringing up social media.
It's like the breeding ground for comparison and self-doubt.
Cross has a whole section on how platforms like Facebook and Twitter can actually amplify chatter.
What are some of the key things he points out?
A big one is this potential erosion of empathy. Because you're not interacting face-to-face and responses are often delayed, it's easier to miss those subtle social cues that tell you when you might be oversharing or dwelling too much.
Like you're not really picking up on the other person's emotional state.
Right. And then there's the whole issue of social comparison. Social media encourages us to present this curated version of ourselves, our highlight reel.
Everyone's always on vacation, eating amazing food, achieving their goals.
Exactly. And we're constantly comparing ourselves to that, which can breed envy and make us feel worse about our own lives. Cross even cites a 2015 study that found that passive Facebook use, just scrolling through and observing, was linked to increased feelings of envy and a drop in well-being.
It's hard not to get sucked into that comparison game. So we've seen how unchecked chatter can mess with our performance, our relationships, our overall mental state. But what can we actually do about it? Does Cross offer any practical solutions?
This is where the book gets really interesting. Cross lays out a whole toolbox of evidence-based strategies for managing chatter.
Okay, I'm all ears.
One of the most intriguing ones is what he calls distanced self-talk.
Distanced self-talk, what's that?
It's about shifting the pronouns you use when you're talking to yourself in your head.
Like instead of saying, I.
Right, so when you're facing a challenge or feeling overwhelmed, instead of saying, I'm so stressed, you'd say something like, you're feeling stressed, or Sarah, you're feeling stressed, using your own name.
Sounds a little weird, but okay.
It might sound odd, but Cross gives some great examples of this in action. He talks about LeBron James referring to himself in the third person during that whole the decision thing, and Malala Yousafzai using her own name in her internal pep talks, like, Malala, you've stood up for this before. The idea is that by changing the language, you create this mental distance from the immediate emotion.
Like you're observing it from outside yourself.
Exactly. And Cross argues that there's real science behind why this works. Research has shown that distanced self-talk can reduce negative emotions, improve performance under pressure, promote wiser reasoning, even lead to more rational thinking in crisis situations.
Wow, so just that one small tweak in language can make a difference.
There was even a study done during the Ebola crisis where people who used their own names when thinking about the situation felt less worried and had a more accurate perception of the risk. And get this, brain imaging studies have shown that this sense of relief can happen within a second of using distanced language. Cross also shares a letter that Fred Rogers, Mr. Rogers, wrote to himself, where he uses his own name to motivate himself. It's pretty powerful.
It's amazing how much our language can influence our thoughts and feelings. What else is in this chatter taming toolbox?
Another great strategy is what Cross calls broadening perspective.
Okay, I'm guessing this is about not getting so caught up in the immediate problem.
You got it. Chatter often involves hyper-focusing on our current worries, making them feel huge and all-consuming. Broadening perspective is about stepping back and looking at the bigger picture.
So how do you do that practically?
One way is to compare your current challenges to past ones that you've overcome, or to consider the wider context of your situation. Cross tells this story about a student at Harvard named Tracy who was struggling with loneliness and feeling like she didn't belong.
Ooh, I can relate to that.
To gain perspective, she started researching her family history and discovered all these incredible hardships her ancestors had faced.
Like what?
Well, they were the descendants of slaves, and she learned about the systemic injustices they endured. This historical understanding helped her put her own struggles at Harvard into perspective.
It's like realizing your problems are part of a much larger story.
Exactly. And journaling is another great way to broaden perspective. By writing about your experiences, you're creating a narrative which helps you distance yourself from the immediacy of the emotions.
So it's not just happening to you right now, it's part of a larger arc.
Right. Another tool Cross talks about is reframing as challenge.
Okay, I think I've heard of this one.
The idea is that when we see a stressful situation as a threat, something we can't handle, it fuels our inner chatter and makes us feel anxious and helpless. But if we can reframe that same situation as a challenge, something difficult but surmountable, it changes our whole response.
We feel more capable.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And research shows this actually leads to better outcomes. Students perform better on exams. People cope better with stereotypes, all sorts of things. And Cross connects this back to distanced self-talk, suggesting that using you or your own name can actually help you adopt that challenge mindset.
So it's all interconnected.
There was even a study that showed distanced self-talk actually led to a more adaptive physiological response to stress, like your body's literally in challenge mode rather than threat mode.
It's wild how much our thoughts can influence our physical reactions. Now, what about social support? We talked earlier about how oversharing negative thoughts can backfire, but Cross does mention it as a tool for managing chatter, right?
Yeah, he does, but with some important caveats. He brings up the work of this researcher named Bernard Rimet, who's studied the social sharing of emotions extensively. And what Rimet found is that simply talking about negative experiences doesn't automatically make you feel better or reduce chatter.
So venting isn't always the solution.
Right. While sharing can provide connection and validation, the way we usually do it doesn't always address the underlying emotional and cognitive stuff that's driving the chatter. This is where the concept of invisible support comes in.
Invisible support, what's that?
It's those subtle, often unnoticed acts of support that people give us, especially when we're stressed or preparing for something challenging. Like, say you're studying for a big exam. Invisible support would be your partner, making sure you have a quiet space to study, or your friend bringing you a coffee.
Like, they're there for you, but they're not constantly asking how stressed you are.
Exactly. And studies have shown this can be more effective at reducing anxiety than more overt forms of support. Cross also talks about the power of physical touch, like a hug or a pat on the back. It can lower our biological threat response and create a sense of safety without even saying a word.
Sometimes we just need that sense of connection that someone's there.
Right. And then Cross gets into the role of our environment in managing chatter. He starts with the power of nature.
Always a good one.
He draws on this theory called attention restoration theory, which basically says that the soft fascinations of nature, things like the rustling of leaves or the sound of water, can capture our involuntary attention, allowing our voluntary attention, which gets depleted by chatter, to rest and recharge.
Makes sense. It's hard to stay stuck in your head when you're surrounded by beauty.
Right. And there's a ton of research showing that even short walks in nature can improve attention and cognitive function. There's even a link between childhood exposure to green spaces and a lower risk of mental health issues later in life. And what's cool is, even looking at photos or videos of nature can have some of these benefits.
So you don't necessarily have to go on a wilderness retreat to get that nature boost.
Exactly. Another environmental factor Cross talks about is awe.
Awe, like that feeling of wonder and amazement.
That's it.
Huh.
And awe has this amazing ability to shift our perspective outward and reduce our self-focus, which is often a big part of chatter. Cross tells the story about a woman named Suzanne who went on a rafting trip through these incredible natural landscapes, and she experienced a huge reduction in her stress and a much calmer inner voice.
It's like you realize how small you are in the grand scheme of things.
Right. And people who are more awe-prone in general tend to be more humble and have a more balanced view of their strengths and weaknesses. Of course, Cross also acknowledges that awe experiences that involve threat or danger, like, say, witnessing a natural disaster, can actually trigger chatter instead of calming it.
So it's about that good kind of awe, the kind that inspires wonder and a sense of connection.
Exactly. And then there's this fascinating concept called compensatory control, which is about creating order in our environment to counter chatter.
Okay, I'm curious about this one.
Cross uses the example of Rafael Nadal, the tennis player, and his meticulous on-court rituals. The way he arranges his water bottles, adjusts his clothes, it's all about creating order in his physical space.
And that helps him mentally.
The idea is that by imposing order externally, it gives him a sense of internal order and control, which can buffer against the mental chaos of chatter, especially during a high-pressure match.
Like your outer world influencing your inner world.
Right. And research shows that when we feel a lack of control in our lives, we're more likely to seek out patterns and prefer structured environments. So creating order, even if it's not directly related to the source of our chatter, can help us regain a sense of calm.
So even something as simple as tidying up your desk could help.
Potentially, yeah. And finally, Cross talks about the power of placebos and rituals for managing chatter.
Placebos, like the sugar pill that makes you feel better.
Exactly. Placebos are a testament to the mind-body connection and the incredible power of our expectations. Cross gives all these examples of placebos working, even citing a study on Parkinson's disease where a sham surgery produced similar benefits to the real one. Our beliefs and expectations play a huge role in how we experience the world.
So it's not just about the actual treatment, it's about what we believe about the treatment.
Right. And rituals, even seemingly arbitrary ones, can be surprisingly effective at mitigating chatter. Cross talks about the Trobriand Islanders and their fishing rituals, and he even mentions personal routines that people do to calm their nerves before big events.
Like lucky socks or pre-game warm-ups.
Exactly. Cross suggests that rituals can actually activate the placebo mechanism, creating a sense of predictability and control that can soothe our inner voice. There was even a study where a simple pre-karaoke ritual improved people's confidence in how they felt they performed.
It's amazing how much our minds can influence our experiences, even in seemingly unrelated ways.
So we've covered a lot of ground here, but what's the main takeaway from all this?
Well, I think Cross really drives home the point that while our inner voice is powerful, we don't have to let it control us. We have all these tools, internal and external, to manage chatter.
Absolutely. And he stresses that there's no one-size-fits-all solution. What works for one person might not work for another.
So it's about finding what works for you.
He even talks about his work in translating this science into educational curricula through the Toolbox Project to equip people with these skills.
That's awesome. So as we wrap up, I think the big question for the listener is how can you apply these tools in your own life?
Right. Like, what if you tried some distant self-talk the next time you're feeling overwhelmed? Or made a conscious effort to experience some awe in nature?
Or even just took a moment to reflect on your own personal rituals, the things that bring you a sense of calm.
It's all about taking charge of that internal dialogue.
Becoming the master of your own chatter.
Exactly.
Thanks for diving deep with us today. Until next time.
See you then.